Not too long ago, the Illuminaughtii channel was known for its ethical, well-made content that was setting the standard for creators on YouTube. I mean, quite literally, the entire brand, down to the mascot's design, was dedicated to calling out the exploitation of the more vulnerable. Whether it was pyramid schemes, financial scams, or animal cruelty, Blair, under the handle iilluminaughtii, slowly developed a reputation for fighting for those who couldn't do it themselves. But almost overnight, the Illuminaughtii channel has begun to act as a monument to everything wrong with the age of the influencer. From content mills built on plagiarism.
If you're just skimming a wiki before making an entire video about something, you miss obvious shit. Blair's videos get stuff wrong all the time.
To ruining people's lives based on nothing more than sheer narcissism.
These people who were your friends, and then when they finally couldn't take how you treated them, you immediately turned on them and worked to isolate them from their friends and their communities.
This spiral ran for 2 years both on and offline with no end in sight.
I'm not thrilled at the idea of spending a majority of my 20s, possibly the next 2 years, stuck in legal litigation in opposition to Blair. I just want to be able to live my life.
And then out of nowhere, it all just ended.
The lawsuit has been dismissed against all parties without any admission of fault by any party.
But with hundreds of pages worth of legal documents, hours of videos making accusations, and more names to keep track of than an unexpected crossover, it's been almost impossible to keep up. So let's make sense of the winners, the losers, and the future of Illuminauttii's downfall. One that somehow all started with complaints about video editing. See, all this started because Illuminaughtii came out with several accusations aimed at Legal Eagle, a lawyer who found massive success on YouTube with his videos breaking down legal issues in the public eye. More specifically, Blair released a series of tweets accusing Legal Eagle of plagiarism and ultimately copying her style of videos. Which is a huge accusation, so it's a good thing she came with evidence. Or at least tried to, failed, and made it very clear that she is not the lawyer in this situation. See, one of Legal Eagle's editors had reached out to one of Blair's to inquire about an editing effect that the latter had used in an Illuminaughtii video, but that effort was unfruitful. So Legal Eagle's team ended up figuring it out on their own and had used the effect in some of their videos. And based solely on that, Illuminaughtii accused Legal Eagle of trying to replicate her videos, which as a video editor myself, I can easily respond to those accusations. They were really dumb and not worth dwelling on. For starters, the effects that Illuminaughtii are referring to are common to see in documentaries. Her and her team didn't invent any of this. In fact, they're pretty generic visual effects. But two, even if she had invented this effect, she doesn't own it. Taking inspiration from other creators or artists is how online content or art grows at all. I mean, take this effect that editors often use for a clip that is too low of a resolution. Almost every online editor has used this trick at some point. Are we all guilty of plagiarism? What about thumbnail metas? No, because you're talking about such a small part of the package that is a YouTube video. It's especially dumb when you remember channels that rip the exact thumbnail, scripts, and production of large channels. You know, actual plagiarism. So for Blair to target Legal Eagle and question his integrity over her lack of understanding of what creating is, it led to her receiving a ton of backlash from everywhere. And it wasn't long before people were accusing Illuminaughtii of being guilty of actual plagiarism, such as taking excerpts from a documentary verbatim in her own script. And in the face of all of this negative publicity, the floodgates against Illuminaughtii have been absolutely unleashed, with multiple former members of the collab channel Sad Milk coming out and detailing their experiences with Blair. More specifically, Twitter threads and later videos were released by The Click, OneTopic, Blair's former employee Wonderstruck, and her ex-partner Oz Media. These four have come out in solidarity to detail the abusive and controlling behaviors allegedly suffered at the hands of Blair, and in each of these four cases, Blair's behavior apparently escalated into obsession once they severed ties with her, often involving instances of conspiracy or extortion.
What I can only describe as retaliation from the person who's my ex, former employer, and prior colleague, Blair is in the process of currently foreclosing my home.
Just to get back at an ex-colleague, she did this, she paid people to dig up dirt, make alt accounts, harass me for months. Why?
I'll get into how over time Blair would have controlled every aspect of my life, be it transportation, income, and housing.
This wasn't just trying to separate yourself from us like we asked for. You acted like this was a war and that you should be recruiting soldiers to come after us. You lied, and I can only think that's because you wanted us gone.
And the clique went on to expose an entire conspiracy that Blair was spearheading against these four, but I'll get to that. And across these dozens of tweets, Blair's reputation and credibility took a huge hit. And while it's necessary to say that these are allegations and not proven facts, the consistency in these stories does raise a lot of questions about Blair. Questions she tried to answer in a 42-minute response video. And to say that the reaction to this video has been negative would be a massive understatement. The dislikes outweigh the likes, and the comments are universally negative, with particular criticism being aimed at Illuminaughtii seeming to play the victim, violating multiple people's privacy, and refusing to consider any responsibility for her actions. And honestly, the video was shockingly unfocused and sloppy in my opinion, which might sound harsh, but Blair spends most of the video not even trying to respond to the accusations, but instead trying to undermine the credibility of the clique and Wonderstruck through unrelated character assassination. She provided very little evidence that was directly relevant to claims of her behavior, and the bits of relevant evidence that she did provide were shown to be taken out of context by the clique and Wonder, which I'll get to. And while the video seemed quite unfocused to me, one aspect really stood out: the distinct manner in which Blair addressed each of the four individuals who shared their experiences with her, employing a unique approach for every single one. For example, you have the clique, where she basically tried to paint him as this horrible enabler of child abuse.
He cultivated an environment that was a breeding ground for inappropriate behavior with minors to occur, and that's exactly what happened.
As well as being guilty of using offensive language to the discomfort of those around him.
At the time in 2020, Clique was still using horrifying language and slurs that have long been deemed unacceptable.
More specifically, Blair seemed to look for any small thing Clique said so that she could respond by attacking his character based on loosely related events that it seemed were very misrepresented. But throughout all of this, she does very little to dispute his actual claims towards her behavior. But let's start getting into specifics. Clique says in his thread that Blair had spies working for his Discord, a pretty quick mention which led to Blair going into a whole section about how Clique had an issue in his Discord where there were adults acting inappropriately with minors, which he was directly enabling.
He allowed this sexually explicit language to occur around minors. He referred to them as spies, which only shows that he didn't really see any issue with the state of his server.
And she repeatedly plays up that there are victims of Clique's negligence.
I am sorry to those minors who were spoken to. Providing links in the description box for a few resources for anyone who I wish that the Clique had more accountability of his own were, and some of you likely are still. This is and always has been unacceptable.
Which, before even getting into how the Clique seemed to prove that she was being very misleading with this section, what does any of that have to do with anything? Two people can suck. That defense hardly does anything to address his accusations against her. And she relies on that defense again in response to Clique saying that she took advantage of bad PR against him to punish him by ensuring that Clique's bad PR was being constantly brought back up. In response to that, Blair said that Clique was using the R word in 2020, which, like, what does any of this have to do with anything he said about your behavior and character? And if it sounds like I'm going easy on him, just wait until I get to Clique's response, because he does a really good job in my opinion of debunking these two claims, which ultimately leaves Blair with no defense against Clique's depiction of her character. And while initially the Clique was the face of those speaking out against Blair, Wonderstruck was where this really escalated, because most of Blair's video was focused on Wonder's claim that she gained control over his life. And in this section, most people agree that Blair crossed a line in a deeply disgusting way.
What she did to Wonder is the most gross expose I have ever seen. Not only does she openly share his potential side note,
where she discloses very personal and intimate details of Wonder's mental health, such as him expressing suicidal thoughts to her. She also makes claims about Wonder being an unreliable employee, over-exaggerating their dealings, being neglectful towards his dog, and forcing her to repossess a car she had leased him due to his negligence. Basically, while she focused on the Clique's character, she focused a lot more on portraying Wonder as unreliable or unstable, even using things that she had learned in confidence to help make this case. Though one topic she mostly glosses over. She mentions an instance of yelling at him, says it was because he talked over her in a call that she didn't want to participate in, but says very little towards him specifically. And lastly, there's Oz.
She also dodged Oz's entire statement, which, yeah, I'll let him tell his side of the things too.
Now, Blair cries while discussing her time with Oz, which they responded to by directly calling her manipulative, and saying it was a tactic she would frequently use. And while we now know they had a romantic relationship, neither Oz nor Blair initially acknowledged their connection as such. But again, Blair did very little to acknowledge everything Oz and OneTopic had said about her. If I'm being honest, a lot of the video felt more like trying to drag down whoever she could with her, more than defending herself or setting the record straight. It felt like when there were minor disputes she could make, she did, but those disputes did very little to combat claims of her being controlling or manipulative. The most that she says is that she was forced to exhibit those behaviors at times because the others dropped the ball as business partners, which might very well be true, but when these four guys who have clearly been in a fair amount of conflict with each other are agreeing that the problems go beyond that, that's not a great look. Also, iilluminaughtii states that they accept responsibility for their actions, but nearly everything they respond to comes with excuses, so many were saying she did the opposite. So, negative reception aside, what has the fallout from this video been? Well, it initially seemed like Blair's accusers were satisfied airing their grievances on Twitter, but Blair's video sparked a stronger response. So over the past 2 years, each of these four creators have taken to YouTube to present their experiences in greater detail while providing evidence that would shine a light on Blair's behavior behind the scenes. This started with The Click, followed by Wonder, OneTopic, and eventually Oz Media. And with each video, the outrage against Blair has only become stronger, starting with The Click, who presented a compelling case that much of Blair's accusations against him were framed in an incredibly misleading way. For example, the so-called groomer that was welcome in his Discord, that all happened while he was sleeping.
In the allegations against me, it is claimed that I didn't react or respond to the situation. Number 1, being asleep at 2 AM detail was completely left out. 2, the fact that he was actually banned before this whole thing was left out. And 3, a receipt of iilluminaughtii reaching out to me to get me to respond wasn't shown in her video or allegations. And the reason for this is that it doesn't exist.
Additionally, his Discord has 44,000 members and over 3,000 bans because this behavior is a problem consistent across Discord. In regards to her accusations about him being an enabler, Click basically asserts that he does what can be expected of him, and her attempt to say otherwise was disingenuous.
I am proud of you. It sounds from this chat, starting from the time I was caught up on the night's events to the time after our voice call, that it worked out quite well.
Additionally, Click points out that Blair refrained from showing his own words in regards to these events.
As you can see from this chat, this was already resolved a while back by that time. In the same conversation, we also talk about the out-of-context other screenshots she shared in her own video. It's odd, if she wanted to paint a full picture of these events, she didn't include my own words on the matter, but just insinuations. Words she had access to this whole time.
He also said that iilluminaughtii had been lying about interactions between them long before her recent video.
Here's a screenshot where she's sharing that same group call and saying, "This is that call where I railed Click for not doing anything for months." Note that this date is in October, a couple of weeks after we had left Sad Milk. The statement about us leaving was made in November, but we had actually left a month prior. So the twisting of these events have been going on for quite a while.
And he concludes this segment saying this.
And if you still don't believe me, you can check out my Discord yourself. It's linked in every description of my channel, and my staff and I do our best to make it as wholesome and supportive as possible. So I'm surprised it's being painted in such a dark way when it's right there. You can actually just go look.
Now, in response to accusations about his language in 2020, Click spoke to Oz directly, whose words Blair had used as evidence. And Oz not only says it was likely that they were exaggerating, but he and Blair would often come up with narratives of how to spin things behind the scenes. Make a note of that, it's pretty important. He also calls out several examples of Blair presenting as a savior despite actually doing very little in a given situation.
I spoke with YouTube directly. This is something that I now look back on with so much regret. Had I known at the time what was going on behind the scenes, I never would have participated in helping Click with his channel.
Why was this in the video? To be clear, my channel was restored by the help of my network, which is a service I pay for. She might have tagged YouTube on Twitter or chatted with support, but the fact remains, she wasn't the one who saved my channel.
He also provides a pretty convincing example of her trying to start rumors about those who went against her while having deniability.
Here is Sad Milk posting on the 1st of November, 3:28 AM, that Salty Clicking OT will not be continuing the new journey with Sad Milk and we're leaving the channel. And here's a tweet from iilluminaughtii saying, "Casual reminder, pedophilia is never a gray area." Immediately after announcing her departure from Sad Milk, within 3 hours, this statement was made by iilluminaughtii and retweeted by Sad Milk.
This resulted in multiple rumors about Click starting, which, yeah, it doesn't take a brain surgeon to see how, and it's really hard to say that Blair didn't know what she was doing there. And I gotta be honest with you, the Click overall handled this in a much more convincing way. There are multiple moments where he's comfortable admitting fault with no defense, which makes the times that he does defend himself more convincing. Unlike Blair, who always tried to rationalize her behavior while somehow claiming that she was taking responsibility.
When people came to me around this time and told me they had had a word used against them simply for being neurodivergent, I personally stopped using it in my content or for posts I read out, and also did my best to remove jokes containing the word in older content.
I want to own up to my faults and take responsibility for my actions. Furthermore, I want to take responsibility for my own involvement with a crowd I am happy to no longer associate with. I did make bad decisions, I've made bad friends, and there will forever be a bad taste in my mouth regarding some of the individuals I've spoken about today.
But I still haven't gotten to the most shocking thing to come out from all this. Now, I don't say this lightly, but the clique made a really compelling case for Blair running basically a shadow campaign against him. This included multiple examples after their splitting of Blair trying to craft the narrative that former Sad Milk members enable child likers.
Here's the same chat room again, twisting a joke from a collab video from myself and OT. And they made a driver of the free candy van joke? Holy poo! What the frick? Really? A white van joke is your banger evidence? What is this? Are you serious? Here's the same chat room again, in what I'm assuming is suggesting that my my god, I'm so down with the kids boomer joke from Twitter has implications. If straws were growing on straws, this would be the straws that were being grasped at, man. What the hell?
But that's nothing. I mean, it's not like Illuminati paid someone to dig up dirt on Click, right? Yeah, except he provided proof that that's exactly what she did.
She said it in a Sad Milk video, but can't remember which one, and she's over her head. I'll pay you $200 to find it, and here's the payment. She actually paid people to dig up dirt and run smear campaigns on ex-colleagues, specifically snooping through my oldest content, years of decade-old content, and compiling it.
And if that wasn't bad enough, Click also provides evidence of Illuminati running several alt accounts that were dedicated to smearing him, with Blair on Discord drafting a post that this alt account eventually posted. And this evolved into obsessive behavior by Blair to ruin Click.
The alt account is gonna love this. Here it keeps going. Hey, listen, Blair, I'm putting this all together. This is all Blair replying to her own announcement under an alt account. And it keeps going. Here is the same account, Dubishmerts, on Twitter that was relentlessly harassing myself, my friends, my colleagues, my streaming colleagues, past colleagues, ex-Sad Milk members, community members, you name it. You name it. This isn't some small YouTuber beef. This isn't people being angry at each other because, ooh, someone did a bit more work in a project or not. I need a break, man. I need a break.
So to say that this video strengthened a lot of the claims made against Illuminati would be putting it lightly, as the video's reception and comments all illustrate. And you know what hurts our case even further, at least for me? Those original tweets to Legal Eagle, the ones that started this whole mess. Because with that, you have a very public and straightforward example of Blair perceiving an injustice against her where there wasn't one, developing a grudge, and then trying to publicly punish or shame that person, which is exactly what she was accused of doing by the other four. Especially since it doesn't look like she reached out to Legal Eagle privately to try to settle this at all. And while I admit that I'm entering the realm of speculation, I can't imagine reading those tweets and think that they portray a mature, healthy mindset, you know? But I'm gonna switch gears and talk about Wonderstruck, because his video was the next to be released, and his involvement is where this entire situation escalated to a level no one saw coming, because not even Blair's former friends could predict how far she would go in order to discredit Wonder.
My mental health, which was proudly put on display for the world to see.
You see, while the clique described Blair's efforts behind the scenes to ruin him, Wonder's experience was much more direct and disturbing, as he claimed that Blair, under the guise of generosity, gained total control over his life and used this power to manipulate him.
I'll get into how over time Blair would have controlled every aspect of my life, via transportation, income, and housing.
And in Blair's aforementioned response video, she focused primarily on portraying Wonder as mentally unstable and unreliable, not to mention a lazy freeloader.
I kept him on payroll. I continued his pay, even though no work had ever been completed. Although there was only a minuscule amount of work for Wonder to do, he still managed to act up within company spaces,
which caused her to receive loads of backlash, especially because she used intimate details she learned about Wonder during their friendship to make this point. Basically, any of Wonder's low points that Blair witnessed, that was fair game in her efforts to assassinate his character. And Wonder had initially responded with a twit longer detailing some of his larger disagreements with Blair's video, with the promise of a response video soon, a promise he would eventually keep, because Wonder released an 80-minute response that immediately saw a positive reception. And what really set the tone for this was Wonder choosing to show his face, as he mostly operates as a faceless creator, much like White did. And he starts out by primarily addressing Blair's accusations against the clique, where he apparently provided a breeding ground for child likers, which he debunked rather soundly. To make matters worse, Wonder directly points out that Blair's actions don't align with this narrative at all.
But But a personal question I would like to ask. If Blair had the information and documented evidence on a Discord server that, as she depicted, cultivated files, and truly believe this, why did she wait 3 years to come forward? Why did she allow the click on Sadmilk or play games with him in the free time?
He then highlights that as a collaborator, Blair demonstrated unwarranted hostility towards OneTopic and Click, ultimately resulting in their exit from Sadmilk.
I'd like to clarify that OT did not speak over her out of disrespect, but out of a minor Discord delay, to which she said, and I quote, "Shut the up and let me talk for once." I remember it clearly. It was very nasty. Click, however, tried to remain at the call and mitigate his intentions were for the betterment of the group, but Blair kept berating him. I have never heard Click, a very extroverted and talkative man, remain so quiet. It was a very dark call.
Wonderstruck then shares a damning revelation for Blair, at least in my view. He admits that when Blair tried to spin a false narrative about these departures, he actually lied to back her up.
So she took to Reddit to falsify a narrative, which you can read on screen. I joined in as well on this. I explained how those who departed did not help us in numerous ways and that it all fell onto us. I'd like to point out that I directly lied on this post.
Why is this significant? Well, Us Media previously confessed to acting as Blair's enforcer, essentially supporting her in some of her problematic behavior, and his acknowledgement of engaging in such conduct with Blair significantly reduced the chance that Blair could be innocent, because now it appears more likely that the 4 creators accusing Blair of abuse are being truthful, especially when one admits to enabling her actions for a time, potentially harming their own reputation. With Wonderstruck echoing these sentiments, it only reinforces this impression. So with this united front, a clear narrative has formed. Blair behaved abusively, Oz and Wonder enabled her actions for a while, but eventually saw the error in their ways and departed. As Wonder and Oz firmly back Click and OT while owning up to their part, it makes a strong case that Illuminaughtii is largely responsible for the bulk of this toxicity. Meanwhile, Blair provided excuses for every accusation leveled against her and consistently refused to genuinely accept blame, further undermining her credibility. Wonderstruck then addresses Blair's portrayal of Sadmilk, where she had suggested that the 4 creators were poor business partners, which forced her to exhibit her controlling behaviors. More specifically, Wonder essentially echoes the Click's accusation that Blair exaggerated her importance or contribution to paint herself as a savior or victim. In Sadmilk's case, this mainly involved her claiming sole financial responsibility for producing videos. However, Wonderstruck presents bank statements that suggest that she was reimbursed when she had to invest her own money.
So while yes, Blair did pay for edits, she was always reimbursed for this. As you can see stated on the screen, you will find bank statements I made directly to Sadmilk during its infancy,
indicating that her claims were not entirely accurate. Wonder then goes to tackle Blair's attempts to paint him as a freeloader. This starts with him discussing his time working with Sadmilk, doubling down on being paid late at times, and provides bank statements to help support this. But where this gets serious is when he talks about Blair violating his privacy in her video.
I feel this is very contradictory to say without going into personal details, than to turn around and spread personal details about my views towards life. Again, these were very private things I kept between you.
And this narrative that Blair was trying to spin, it included taking things out of context and glossing over important details. For example, when Blair discusses Wonder crashing with Oz, she failed to mention that this happened because Blair intended on becoming a landlord.
I have never had someone else pay my rent once in my life, and I have been living on my own since I was 18. To try to paint me as a freeloader when you also leave out that I was originally only supposed to stay until August, you were supposed to be my landlord, and that I only stayed 30 days in Colorado feels like a contorted attack on who I am as a person. It was because Blair wanted to get her hands into the real estate market and wanted to build a home, something she had discussed with other former Sadmilk members. It wasn't just me.
Wonder states that Blair portrayed him as a freeloader when he had consistently expressed discomfort at living with Oz rent-free, and such circumstances only happened because of changes out of his control after he had started a lease.
I sincerely do not understand why the conception of this home was never presented in the video. It leaves out a massive gap of context. The home I was told would be finished by August and that I could stay the summer. And the last month before moving to Colorado, after finalizing my lease, I was informed that the home would be pushed back until December.
And as for Wonder trying to rip off Blair as an employee, he had Oz speak to his perspective on this, boss, who had said this.
You weren't provided work for like a majority of the time that you were actually employed, and you were kind of just literally being paid to like stand around. I might be wrong on this, but you were actively trying to seek out and find work, so it's not like you were just like freeloading off of it. From my memory, you were trying to actually earn your keep.
Now, once again, it's important to note that Oz was very close to Blair throughout all of this and was actively involved in her dealings with others. Wonder also points out that Blair goes out of her way to explain the benefits that Wonder didn't take advantage of, when he only worked for her for 60 days. She did go out of her way to highlight that Wonder didn't partake in community service during his time as an employee, which Wonder flatly states was unnecessary to bring up.
If I didn't use any of the benefits, why is it necessary to go into detail about them? Was I expected to, in the middle of moving to a new state for the first time since I was 7, volunteer at a soup kitchen to pass the time? The reason I did not use any of these benefits was because I was employed for roughly 60 days.
Furthermore, Wonder expresses mistreatment around his termination, specifically that he was fired for not meeting deadlines, but he was fired before his deadline had actually passed.
It was here on this call that I was fired for explicitly not meeting deadlines, which I find highly confusing due to, once more, I must reiterate that my deadline was August 2nd.
There were issues with his software corrupting, which he says led to him flying back and forth to Colorado so that Oz Media could fix it. This apparently led to his termination, though Wonder specifically notes that throughout all of this, he had been dealing with Blair subtweeting about him. Basically, passive-aggressive posts that don't use his name, but are pretty easy to figure out the context.
But I'd like to remind you that I flew to another state just to meet this deadline for my boss, who was constantly subtweeting about me. You can see is acknowledged even by one of her own managers, and they told me specifically that this was not okay behavior.
Which, yeah, that's incredibly inappropriate behavior for a boss to make tweets putting down someone working at their company. That's pretty inexcusable. He also says that the fireable offenses that Blair claims he committed, he was never spoken to about them.
I have a strict policy regarding formal disciplines, and within his short time of working with me, he had already met the criteria for termination.
Blair claims to have a strict policy on discipline, yet why didn't she or her staff ever reach out to me about this problem? Why does she not provide evidence on this comment? This was along the lines of the comment that I made. If I could be an animal for a day, I would be a furry, and my favorite food would be ass. You can't make this up, man. Total loss of income because I said as a joke, I said I was a furry. I don't know.
And overall, Wonder expressed outrage at Blair attempting to portray him as an unreliable freeloader given his attempts to contribute.
While I was in their home, if I didn't know how to help, I would oftentimes clean their home. I wanted to help Blair with her recording space as she felt stressed in her little office. I wanted to buy us plants to liven the place up. I tried at every possible turn to earn my keep. And when I felt alienated, I tried to actively find an apartment in Colorado Springs to give them both the space, as I felt horrible, seemingly never being able to help in any way at all.
Wonder goes on to talk about Blair slowly gaining more control over his life.
I do in fact have a car, I have a house, and I have a job. However, the one scary thing when you put all that on a spectrum is they are all provided by one singular individual. Blair. She had a hand in every single aspect of my life, and at any moment she could take it away when she felt, which is exactly what happened.
With his car, he says that Blair insisted he allow her to get him a BMW.
Blair touches on the subject of a BMW she purchased for me. I was extremely uncomfortable with someone making such a large payment towards a vehicle on my behalf, but in Blair's words, she had the money and insisted that I get the car. After a few more discussions, she eased me into the idea that this car was a good move and would really change my life.
He then says he was starting to dissociate because he didn't know what he was doing wrong.
I told my therapist at this point that I hadn't felt real in a while, which anyone who has suffered with dissociation and dissociative episodes can all but relate to. I also reiterated how everything was starting to feel rather pointless and I didn't know what I was... that's so lame. I don't like to get emotional, but I didn't know what I was doing wrong.
He wasn't assigned work, yet treated like a bad employee. He was treated like a freeloader when he resisted the circumstances of their living arrangement, and he generally no longer felt welcome at Blair's home. He then visited his father to get away, but Blair used this as an excuse to repossess his car.
A few days later, after being fired on July 27th, on July 29th, Blair came to Texas to revoke a car in the middle of the night. I asked Blair for an explanation as to how I breached my contract, to which I was ignored. Blair claims I broke the contract by the following: no proof of insurance, cars to reside in El Paso, County. Okay, well, here's my proof of insurance, and here's my official mailing address during this time. You can clearly see it states Colorado.
In fact, Blair reclaimed the car while Wonder was trying to figure out how much he owed her for the depreciating value of the car.
However, when I asked to see everything my name was tied to legally with the car, which any person would do, I was met with a copy of the car contract. So I asked again to see the paperwork of the car. After this message, I never once got a response.
Wonder and Oz both agreed that Wonder was showing clear intention to return it legally, yet Blair rushed to punish Wonder. And if that wasn't bad enough, the belongings that Wonder had in his car were stolen and thrown out.
I sent her one last text stating I would be ceasing communication and that she could reach me and make arrangements for my belongings via my father's number. Not one attempt was ever made. And now I wake up and all my belongings are gone. What she fails to show in her video is my skateboard, both my Sad Milk and Wonderstruck Guy play buttons, my $800 GoPro set, and a whole list of other items I was prohibited from obtaining. These items were subsequently thrown in the trash.
And when Wonder tweeted about this happening, he was threatened with a lawsuit, which is especially outrageous when you remember Blair's previous conduct in tweeting about him. He then addresses the most controversial part of Blair's video, her exposing various aspects of his mental health.
Which leads me to my next and most painful section, my mental health, which was proudly put on display for the world to see.
Specifically, Wonder talks about struggling with childhood trauma and OCD, which made him especially vulnerable. The opportunity that Blair presented came to represent a chance for Wonder to be successful and be able to afford resources such as therapy. He then stated that he perceived Blair's actions in response to his suicidal episode to have been insincere. Specifically, he showed anger at her for sending police to his house after the episode had concluded.
So when Blair claimed she sent authorities to my house for a wellness check, she didn't care about me. She put in her own Google Drive that I brought the mention of guns to the table and she was locking the cars away and was scared, leaving out that the weapon in reference was aimed towards me. Also, something I'd like to note is that I wasn't there when Blair called 911 to send authorities to my home, but depending on her wording, it could have gone very wrong. To tell authorities there is a mentally unwell man with a weapon, that can go so very bad, so very fast.
Wonder went on to discuss Blair portraying him as a negligent dog owner to his dog James to the detriment of Blair's dog Casper. And in essence, much of this followed Blair's tactics up until this point, which involves saying things that aren't untrue, but are instead missing context that paint a different picture. For example, the dog arriving without even a collar or food. Well,
I did bring dog food. It was just about half a bag though. James's brand of dog food is also specific to a store in Texas known as HEB, so I had to find him a new specific kind of dog food as he had a sensitive stomach. As for his collar, James did have a collar, but it was old and starting to wear. I went to PetSmart on my second day in Colorado and bought him a brand new dog tag alongside a red plaid collar, a collar which he still wears to this day.
And certain interactions between the two dogs, Wonder says stemmed from Blair's dog being a puppy and rougher. Wonder also responded to the claim that he let his dog out by accident by confirming exactly that.
I personally messed up and I take full accountability for it happening. I left James out in the backyard. But what pet owner hasn't made a mistake like this once or twice in their life? Sometimes someone forgets to close the door or the gate or whatever and it happens. It's a story as old as time. It doesn't mean you don't care about the dog, it just means an accident happened.
And again, personally, that to me, the idea of saying, I messed up, that is totally on me. I just don't think that one mistake is enough to make sweeping statements about my character. That's a lot more compelling than Blair excusing every action by saying she was forced to while saying she's apologizing, but not really. He even goes into missing context from James escaping, which is that it only happened due to damage in the fence.
Blair leaves out that the way James got out was because a fence wire broke loose, undoing some of the fencing along a post, allowing a small entryway into the neighborhood. Had this not come undone, James would be sitting on the dog beds waiting, which again, James being outside is my fault, but the fence failing is just human error.
And as for the incident of James making a mess in the house, once again, Blair refrains from mentioning that Wonder was sleeping as opposed to making an active decision to not do anything. If you're keeping track, this mirrors how Blair accused Click of negligence towards abuse, especially when you consider that Wonder and Oz state that Wonder was already awake and cleaning the mess before Blair had discovered it.
You were actually like very well awake and already cleaning the mess up when we had actually got upstairs. And, you know, Blair and I, of course, we weren't happy to see that initially, but when we had gone upstairs, you were already cleaning up the mess.
And Wonder's final point with Blair was directly accusing her of lying. Wonder had claimed that Blair was living in filth while living in Oz's home, and Blair responded to that claim harshly.
What was the point of this, Wonder? Why would you even bother posting something like this except to humiliate me? This was a room that we told you we were using to move, and we let you know it was off limits to you. That photo alone shows your consistent lack of respect for Oz's and my boundaries. And Wonder, I am sorry that I was ever friends with you.
Wonder refutes her claims by revealing that the photos he used to make this case were sent to him by Oz, long after Wonder had moved out from the house. He even has Oz elaborate on this experience.
There was no clean. It was always like that. It wasn't just one room, it was every room. And she would never help with cleaning. It was always me. I was always the one breaking down all 800 of her Amazon boxes. I was always the one doing anything cleaning wise. It just felt like I was there to clean up her mess.
Boxes, trash, cups of mold, all sent to me again 2 years after I left Colorado.
He then ends the video by talking about and with Oz. Wonder provided the apology that Oz sent to him personally, saying that while he was initially very skeptical, he does accept Oz's apology.
But over the last few months, Oz has made countless efforts to prove not only to me, but to every other former Sad Milk member that he truly was sorry for the role he played in anything that took place. I don't blame him for his role. He was in an abusive situation and had every reason to fear Blair. I feared her too for a very long time.
So if the clicks video was already devastating for Illuminaughtii's image, I can't think of a word that does justice to how much worse Wonder's story left her looking. And we're only halfway done with her accusers. But between the release of Wonder's video and OneTopics, how is Blair responding to these developments? Well, at first, it seemed like Blair's plan was just to ignore this until the controversy blew over. She resumed posting on the Illuminaughtii channel like normal, ignoring the swarms of dislikes and people unsubscribing. But of course, this approach didn't last for long. At first, she tried to deny these accusations outright, plainly stating that they were false. Which was probably a bad start because Click and Wonder provided a lot of evidence of their claims, and Blair's statement was vague from start to finish. She goes on to promise transparency and accountability as she handles the situation, as well as a commitment to responding and ensuring that truth will prevail. So, wow, okay, being transparent about your approach with every step is a great way to clear her name if this is all somehow a hoax, right? But it wasn't long before Blair made it abundantly clear that this promise was nothing more than words, sending Wonder a cease and desist to prevent him from commenting any further on this issue, which is actually something Wonder specifically called Blair out for in the past, of basically using her expansive resources to bully adversaries into silence with lawyers. And Wonder has announced his intention to actually fight Blair on this, launching a GoFundMe for his legal fees. And to give you an idea of how massive this has become, Wonder has raised almost $15,000 in just 3 days. And as if Wonder wasn't already likable enough, he pledged to donate any excess funds to the Trevor Project and provide receipts of how he spends every cent of what he raises. Which frankly, it's awesome to see some actual transparency in this situation. I mean, Blair is yet to release any kind of statement on why she's trying to silence Wonder after pledging transparency. It seems like silencing your accuser just because you have more money than them would be the opposite of that, right? But as Blair's retaliation ramped up behind the scenes, OneTopic finally released a video detailing his experience, and his tone throughout makes it clear how disappointed he was to see things develop to this point.
I still maintain an entire lack of interest in pointing fingers over petty things. But not speaking about at least some of what has now been brought up has left a vacuum that can be filled with doubt towards a friend of mine and myself. And without ambiguity, I wanted to address the parts that I was present for that I feel were misrepresented and lied about, just to clear the air on that side, since I feel at least a little bit like some words were put in my mouth.
OT then begins to share gripes with Blair's actions surrounding Sad Milk, specifically that he was unhappy to see Blair continuously provide a false narrative in why Sad Milk disbanded.
And my friends and I left the project when the good no longer outweighed the bad. Anyways, Illuminaughtii has dropped a video about it, one that at the time of recording this is still up, and it should be taken down. Take it for what you will, but a lot was framed incorrectly or was outright false.
He also states that Click and Wonder's depiction of Sad Milk was far more accurate to his experiences than how Blair described it.
A lot has been said about it already in Click's and Wonder's videos. I agree with their recounting, as I remember the same way.
Which again spells some real trouble for Illuminaughtii. If everyone is agreeing that she was the root of Sad Milk's toxicity, especially when these 4 creators have been in conflict with each other in the past, the standard for what Blair has to do in order to clear her name flame just keeps rising. Because what would these four have to gain from framing Blair? They're not responding to accusations from her where it might make sense to lie. They all independently chose to share their piece about this. OT goes on to say that Blair's claims that members of Sad Milk were failing to uphold their financial responsibilities was just untrue. In fact, he states that all of the creators found themselves in different financial situations, so they would typically agree to let the more affluent members take on some additional costs so that their friends who are smaller creators could still participate in the project.
It became pretty clear early on that a couple members couldn't really afford the cost of a fun side project, and we had conversations as a group about how to solve for that. One solution discussed, for example, was the rest of the group taking on those costs. For example, when we found out that one of the group members couldn't get the 100K plaque because they couldn't afford the cost of it, we discussed pitching in together with our earnings to get it for them. It wasn't some debt that they'd owe, but just something that we could do for them so that we could all celebrate together.
OT then addresses Blair's claims about Click fostering an unsafe environment for children by directly calling her a liar who put words in OT's mouth.
It made me uncomfortable to hear words or intentions put in my mouth regarding the group call whose framing in the video does not comport with reality. The retelling of how our group conversation went and using it as a way to frame the situation as Click not actioning soon enough or responding timely is simply a lie.
Additionally, OT doubles down on Click's recollection of those events, that someone was acting inappropriately, this all happened while Click was sleeping, but the issue was resolved with the urgency it required. Also, OT criticizes Blair for how she responded to the situation, where she immediately freaked out and began to jump to conclusions about Click before either of them even spoke to him about this.
And I thought the best way to clear this up would be to just talk to him. It felt weird that we hadn't yet.
OneTopic then accuses Blair of misrepresenting his messages regarding this event. Specifically, the message where OneTopic states that he doesn't want access to the screenshots of the inappropriate Discord user. Blair seemed to strongly imply that the message was sent out of sheer disgust and discomfort towards Click.
And I shared these files with them. And OneTopic opened the files, he was horrified, and he said, and I quote, "I've read one and I don't want access to those screenshots."
But in actuality, that's not what OneTopic says happened. To the contrary, OT states that Blair kept harping on about the banned user and wanted OT to extend his involvement with the situation, despite it being already resolved. That message, according to OT, was basically him saying he doesn't want access to those screenshots because they're disgusting, and him going through them, as Blair was trying to force him to do, was upsetting him for no gain.
Near the end of the call, Illuminaughtii stated that she wanted me to see the screenshots to fully understand the gravity of the situation, and I conveyed that since everything was already discussed and solved, I really didn't want to see the messages of a banned Discord person, and I was told it was important to look at them. So wanting to keep the waters calm, I opened the folder and I looked at one of the screenshots, and then I reiterated in written text what I'd already conveyed, which was that I had no interest in having access to the screenshots.
And generally, OT expressed satisfaction with Click's handling of that situation. In fact, he had even said back then that he was worried that Blair would draw the worst possible conclusion from what was ultimately a non-story, and he humorously points out that years later she's done exactly that.
Yeah, and she woke me up a while ago with a lot of concerns, so I was just sticking around to make sure that she didn't take things to the worst conclusion.
After putting the claims against the Click to rest, OneTopic moves on to the call that resulted in his leaving Sad Milk. See, all the creators speaking out against Blair have agreed that during OT's final call with Sad Milk, she screamed and cursed at him for unintentionally interrupting her.
I'd like to clarify that OT did not speak over her out of disrespect, but out of a minor Discord delay, to which she said, and I quote, "Shut the f up and let me talk for once. I remember it clearly. It was very nasty."
OT said that Wonder's recollection of those events best matches his experience, but he also adds context that somehow makes all of this even worse. Specifically, the meeting was being held during a period that OT and Click had scheduled as time off because they needed a breather from the project.
And when we were told the meeting was to take place, it was during that time off that we had scheduled. Time we needed to step away for a breather.
And while he doesn't specifically state that Blair was the one to schedule the meeting, that seems to be what he was alluding to. And throughout this segment, OT demonstrates a level of pain towards this whole exchange and ultimately says this on his decision to leave Sad Milk.
It became clear during the meeting that me simply staying involved in the project was unhealthy for me, but also that my participation was seen as antagonistic. I don't know what she needed, but whatever it was, whatever kind of help it wasn't what a friend could give. And I don't think I was one at that point. And that sucked.
OneTopic then shares how he and Click announced to Sadmilk that they would be leaving. More specifically, both emphasized a desire to not make a big deal out of their departure.
I don't plan on having a public announcement made, just let it fade out smoothly, with a new style of content that might actually happen naturally.
Currently, I will be stepping away from Sadmilk. I don't have any public messaging planned, as any change, such as someone leaving, can make people feel like a project is on rocky footing, and I don't want my personal exit to be the cause of yet more drama.
And this is in stark contrast to what Blair actually did. She announced their departure on the Sadmilk Twitter, and then within hours she tweeted out on her personal Twitter that child likers are bad, heavily implying that there was someone in her life recently that disagreed with this sentiment. And if that wasn't bad enough, the Sadmilk Twitter retweeted that. Again, this was all within a few hours, so rumors began to run rampant about Click and OneTopic, and it quite frankly doesn't take a genius to figure out how. Furthermore, OneTopic discussed iilluminaughtii lying about their departure on her main Reddit account, where she stated that OT and Click never stepped up to the plate. Wonder had stated that this was an outright lie that he had actually helped spread.
She took to Reddit to falsify a narrative, which you can read on screen. I joined in as well on this. I explained how those who departed did not help us in numerous ways, and that it all fell onto us. I'd like to point out that I directly lied on this post.
So now you have OneTopic, Wonder, and Click all saying that Blair has a pattern of overstating her contribution to various efforts, and this seems to be yet another example of how.
But the fact remains, she wasn't the one who saved my channel.
So while yes, Blair did pay for edits, she was always reimbursed for this.
Moving on from his discussion on Sadmilk, OneTopic joined the Click, Wonder, and basically all of the internet in calling Blair out for exposing Wonder's mental health the way she did.
One thing I never thought would be released was personal details about a group member's mental health or their struggles. I figured those kind of personal details would be off limits and no way would be used as a weapon.
But even further, the Click had previously proven that Blair was using various alt accounts to harass and slander Click and OneTopic, and OneTopic agrees that this harassment was done by Blair.
We were surprised by the Reddit posts. Certainly. The details from the troll account were so specific.
And more specifically, Blair was using these alts to keep calling attention to decade-old actions by Click in order to ruin his reputation and OT's by association.
And I know he apologized for his words that he said when he was 15. And Swedish. And learning English as a second language. However, the account targeted his apology, said it was bad, and continued on to ping others. It became clear the harassment was not intended to stop.
And if that sounds like a reach, OT shows excerpts of Blair's alt attempting to use this bad PR to drive a wedge between the two friends, basically trying to ensure that OT's career couldn't survive if he were to be friends with Click.
And OneTopic is friends with someone while pretending to be wholesome and good. I think OneTopic is a liar and a sham, and has been pandering to our community. If he stays friends with someone like this, he is using us for money. It was such specific phrasing and sounded so familiar.
Which lends a lot of validity to Oz's claims that Blair had isolated him and ultimately cost him multiple friendships. And Blair trying to spread rumors didn't stop with Click and OT. In fact, there was another former member of Sadmilk, Salty, who OT actually asked to respond to an accusation that Blair had made on an alt account. Specifically, Blair alleged that OT and Click basically poached Salty away from Sadmilk.
Did you leave Sadmilk because we were paying you better on the podcast?
No. No. Wait, I was getting paid?
Shut up, Salty.
By doing this, Blair was trying to set the narrative that OT and Click leaving Sadmilk was a betrayal of their community. Basically, the Sadmilk viewers should be taking this personally and turn on the two, which, again, wow. But that's not even close to where this ends. OT stressed in this video how much he values his privacy as a creator, and he had discovered Blair was doing everything in her power to undermine that.
Private details about members of the group who left were being spread around maliciously when I was DM'd by a concerned community member who had been talked to. The message was concerning offline information. It later became clear who that information had originated from, and this was later independently corroborated by a creator who had come forward to me who had witnessed this.
And all of this coming from Blair, it took a clear toll on OneTopic, with him even saying he wouldn't mind if Blair just said negative things about him provided she did it the right way.
I don't care that mean words were said about me or that mean words will still be said about me. There is a distinct difference between privately venting and purposefully spreading of harmful lies.
And in the aftermath of Blair's crusade, OT shares that he's been forced to be wary about who he interacts with or lets interact with his content because they they could find themselves targeted by those sent by Blair, which would once again demonstrate that Blair has a tendency to try and isolate people that she holds a grudge against as much as possible. OT then expresses gratitude towards his support system, but also expresses a level of denial at just how much Blair tried to ruin him, as well as, well, see for yourself.
I still don't want to believe all of this is true. The only kind of person who could slander their friends like this is someone who is darkly unremarkable.
Yeah, he's pissed, and quite frankly, I don't blame him. Friendships, relationships, partnerships, they end. That's just part of life. But it says a lot when someone's going out of their way to hurt someone as much as possible who likely never intended them any harm in the first place. OneTopic then addresses Blair directly and echoes the sentiment shared by the clique, which is that Illuminaughtii simply took this way too far.
This isn't some small YouTuber beef. This isn't people being angry at each other because, ooh, someone did a bit more work in a project or not.
What you did was unacceptable and goes so far beyond any petty beefs or squabbles or hurt feelings. This wasn't just trying to separate yourself from us like we asked for. You acted like this was a war and that you should be recruiting soldiers to come after us. You lied. And I can only think that's because you wanted us gone. You wanted these lies to come into our everyday life offline.
And OT directly calls out Blair's demonstrated pattern of destroying someone just for being a former friend.
These people who were your friends, and then when they finally couldn't take how you treated them, you immediately turned on them and worked to isolate them from their friends and their communities.
And OT ultimately shares his piece about Blair, clearly hurt and pained by what he clearly sees as a situation that was wholly avoidable.
But when we explained our boundaries, it just wasn't good enough. That kind of resentment builds up. It doesn't mean we hated you or that we could never reconnect down the road.
He then closes out his video by addressing common questions he expects to receive. This includes revealing that he had considered legal action against Blair in the past, but doesn't intend on actually pursuing that route unless Blair leaves him no other choice.
Well, stay tuned to see if I get sued, I guess.
And throughout this video, OT seems to emphasize that he and the other former Sad Milk members are in fact on good terms. He states that he spent the last month talking to them and figuring out together what they're going to do about this whole situation. And he ends his video with a clip of the guys just hanging out together to pay tribute to the friendships formed across Sad Milk that weren't toxic.
Wonderstruck, where are your shoes? Wonder, barefoot. Wonder, go inside. Where are your shoes? My only hope. The official Oz Media is chasing me!
But that leaves us with our last story from Oz Media. So, what was he up to during the nearly 5-month gap between Illuminauttii's video and his? Since the situation broke, Oz's main appearance online has been a feature in Wonder's video where he helped corroborate Wonder's claims of being mistreated by Blair. Aside from that, Oz has been mostly silent, with the exception of a few tweets and YouTube comments. This has included Oz sharing that he received a cease and desist from Blair, despite him being the only one to not yet make a video about her. Even worse, a second cease and desist letter was sent to Oz's father for seemingly no other reason than to make those around Oz suffer, which, to be fair, matches the recurring accusation that Blair tries to isolate people that go against her by attacking those around them. It's also worth noting that, at the time, Oz had shared his intention to release a multi-part expose series on Blair's overlooked behavior beyond Sad Milk. Now, seemingly in response to this promise, Blair retaliated by escalating her cease and desist to a lawsuit meant to foreclose Oz's home.
What I can only describe as retaliation from the person who's my ex, former employer, and prior colleague, Blair is in the process of currently foreclosing my home.
Which, it might be surprising that Blair would even have the power to try this, but wait until you hear how she allegedly gained said power. Though fortunately, Oz was able to fend off this move through an incredibly successful crowdfunding campaign that I'll touch on more later. So where does all of this lead us? Well, Oz Media finally posted a video on Illuminaughtii, and it looks like this is only the beginning, as this wasn't even the huge expose that Oz has been working on, but there were still some major reveals. The largest reveal being that he and Blair were actually involved in a romantic relationship.
Blair and I dated. We started when I was 20 and she was 28. And currently, I'm 23. Almost 24.
And that Blair allegedly used this relationship to coerce Oz into submitting to her socially and financially. And if that sounds familiar, Wonder shared similar experiences throughout his friendship with Blair.
I'll get into how over time Blair would have controlled every aspect of my life, be it transportation, income, and housing.
And the similarities go even further, as it's another example of Blair allegedly exploiting a younger and less experienced employee with terrible financial agreements that can be used to punish them, much like what happened with Wonder's car.
A few days later, after being fired on July 27th, on July 29th, Blair came to Texas to revoke a car in the middle of the night. I asked Blair for an explanation as to how I breached my contract, to which I was ignored.
In fact, a lot of this situation perfectly mirrors Wonder's experiences with Blair. Oz even points out just how eerie the similarities are.
As you can see with Wonder, Blair has a habit of taking advantage of younger men, 8 years younger than her, and their financial illiteracy for her own personal gain.
Oz also shared that the complicated nature of this relationship is only adding stress in the production of his video, because he doesn't want something so important to unintentionally devolve into a bitter ex's flawed recollection.
Blair and I dated. We were a couple for a decent chunk of time. This puts me in an ungodly complicated situation of doing everything that I can to try and separate the relationship drama from the public drama, as in the process of dating her, there are a lot of things which I bore witness to.
According to Oz, Blair started to exploit his finances for personal gain during their relationship. This included using Oz's superior credit to secure the car given to Wonder. This resulted in a financial burden that led to Oz asking Blair for help, as she was far more affluent.
This would lead me to asking Blair, my partner, for financial help. Financial help for things such as my home, which she was living in. Help from my partner, who at any given time would be making up to 30 times my monthly income.
But rather than provide support as a partner that was living in Oz's home, she kept track of all this debt in a ledger that Oz would eventually be expected to pay back. Which, yeah, seems unusual if they were partners providing mutual aid based on what they can each offer, yet Oz wouldn't be reimbursed for things like the hits to his credit from loans being taken out in his name. Even worse, Blair had apparently told Oz that she committed embezzlement in order to help him, as she used company funds instead of her own.
And while I can't remember if this exact word was ever used, she essentially explained to me that because she used company funds to assist me, that she had committed embezzlement.
Blair presented a deed of trust as the only way Oz could prevent her from facing legal trouble, which is obviously quite a lot of pressure to put on a partner. But that deed of trust would essentially leave Oz's home as collateral until he paid back the almost $200,000 that he was listed as owing Blair, across 10 years of $2,500 monthly payments. And if Oz fell behind on such a steep bill, Blair could essentially seize his home.
This document gave her the power to foreclose if I was unable to make a monthly payment of nearly $2,500 for nearly a decade.
And if that's not bad enough, Oz explains that his mother was arrested for embezzlement when he was a child, and this leaves him believing that Blair may have intentionally made him relive this trauma so that Oz would be easier to manipulate.
Blair was aware of this past of mine. Whether this was used against me, I can't say for certain, but the idea of another person I loved being locked away, but this time for my actions? Words cannot describe the guilt that I had.
And while the ledger only grew, Oz felt as though he wasn't in a position to clarify what he owed due to both the guilt of him needing help, but also what sounds like pretty blatant manipulation by Blair, where she would allegedly shame Oz for his finances to anyone who would listen.
From her friends, to my friends, to her employees, to hell, even her Discord staff, about my finances, oftentimes unprompted. Guilt involving the fact that everyone I interacted with on a day-to-day basis looked down on me for her words towards me.
And Oz ultimately lands on Blair doing this to fill him with enough shame that he wouldn't be able to question her,
actively putting me in a position where she was chipping away at my mental health. I was afraid to tell anyone what was happening because she had convinced me that I was a parasite, that I avoided telling anyone who could have helped me see what was happening out of fear of further confirmation. More eyes looking down on me.
Which also mirrors Wonder's story exactly, where she allegedly did everything possible to paint him as a freeloader, both privately and publicly, in order to prevent him from getting support.
I have never had someone else pay my rent once in my life, and I have been living on my own since I was 18. To try to paint me as a freeloader feels like a contorted attack on who I am as a person.
Even more, this apparently followed her coercing Oz into relying on her more financially, which was also the case with Wonder.
But in Blair's words, she had the money and insisted that I get the car. After a few more discussions, she eased me into the idea that this car was a good move and would really change my life.
Also, Oz echoed Wonder's sentiment that Blair has a habit of gaining complete control of those around her.
How over time, Blair would have controlled every aspect of my life, be it transportation, income, and housing.
When you're around Blair, your world revolves around her. In my case, My home was hers, despite her name not being on it. I had no friends out in Colorado, a state that I moved to at the behest of Blair. Only Blair's friends were out here. All of my connections had to be approved by her. I wasn't allowed to be friends with people she didn't like. I was even in a position where my finances were nearly entirely controlled by her, from what debts I took on to later being the fact that she was the person who signed my paychecks.
And these parallels go even further, as Blair would become Oz's employer and have additional control over his life as a result, while framing this control as generosity, which also echoes Wonder's claims shockingly well. And while people do get too eager to villainize any relationship with an age gap of more than a month, I do think this is actually a good example of an exploitative one. At 28, she was a business owner with much stronger finances, while Oz was barely more than a teenager and probably didn't have the ability to recognize when someone was taking advantage of him yet, since that's kind of a skill you gain from experiencing bad relationships.
Hell, I even took a position in her company at a lower pay to try and pay this debt back. Offered to work with her in her crypto farm for free to pay back the debt.
Which, yeah, it's a bad look for Blair to have an ex-partner describe being coerced into financial reliance, and oh, it just so happens providing Blair with free labor would help fix this. In fact, Oz elaborates that it would have been impossible for him to even try to keep up with the $2,500 payments unless he continued this arrangement with Blair.
Blair knew that even with my income working for her, that this wasn't possible. It feels as though she knew that I would be destined to fall behind.
And with Oz being paid so little, he even expressed that Illuminaughti's stark rise into financial success on YouTube was largely because of his contributions, but that wasn't reflected in how much he was paid.
While I worked for Blair's company, I helped improve it in any way that I could with my knowledge of how YouTube worked. I was able to assist in the push for Blair's channel to make the sudden and stark rise into a new payout range of 6 figures a month. All while I was being paid not even enough to get by with my monthly bills.
In fact, he dedicated so much time to helping the Illuminaughtii channel operate that he neglected his own channel for a year.
While also trying to help save her channel. This would lead me to up and almost entirely abandon my channel throughout the year of 2022.
And Oz shared that he didn't fully understand just how messed up this dynamic was until more recently, which also echoes Wonder's experience.
It wasn't until recently when I explained my situation to my parents, my friends outside of Blair's control, that I began to understand just how perverse my life had become for nearly 3 years.
And all of this climaxed in December of 2022, where Oz described being coerced into signing a legal agreement with Blair penned by her lawyer, while Oz didn't have the ability to afford representation at all.
When I was 23 and Blair was nearly 31, Blair, with her lawyer, would create an honestly quite confusing legal document for me to sign where I would agree to pay back her debt. Blair, being the person who signed my checks, knew that I couldn't afford legal representation.
On top of that, this agreement would lead to Oz basically having to work for Blair for free.
Everything I made working for her was going right back into her pocket.
And Oz goes on to set the tone of how he was coerced into signing such an agreement.
Blair would bring me to her lawyer's office, put me in a room alone with the two of them, with papers in front of me. Papers which I foolishly signed for a myriad of reasons, ranging from Blair expressing that this would mend our relationship, that it was the right thing for me to do.
And what makes this even worse is that despite Blair dangling the promise of reconciling their relationship in order to get Oz to sign this agreement, that didn't happen.
It wouldn't be until a few weeks after signing that document that I would learn that she had already moved on, and had almost everyone in my daily life keep this fact a secret from me.
Oz even clarifies that he would be perfectly okay with paying back his debts, but takes issue with the fact that this is hitting Oz so close to home out of retaliation for him speaking out against abuses experienced at the hands of his ex.
I'm not trying to escape any debt that I may rightfully owe Blair. I just don't want to lose my home or lose it from retaliation.
Now, the second major takeaway from this video was the status of Oz's full expose on Illuminaughtii, because believe it or not, this wasn't it. He shared that the video was still in production with a manuscript of over 100 pages and with over 3 hours of footage. However, he finds himself financially and mentally needing to resume his output of usual content, meaning he'll be working on both side by side.
I need to, and more importantly, I want to continue my regular content so I can afford to live day to day.
He's also been in contact with multiple other individuals to get their experiences with Blair, and this is part of why his video has been taking so long. Oz's manuscript was originally only 20 pages long, but as he tries to uncover the experiences of others, it leads him deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole.
Interviews, questionnaires, screenshots, the works. all from a number of individuals.
Though Oz speculates that Blair has been vigilant of this possibility all along.
To me, it feels like Blair is taking every course of action that she can to prevent this video from being produced.
Then you have Oz's GoFundMe. It's really important to note that in all of this, iilluminaughtii is one of, if not the most affluent parties in this situation, especially when compared to Oz Media and Wonder. Wonder previously participated in crowdfunding to pay for his legal fees in this fight against Blair, and Wonder eventually did the same. Now so far, OneTopic and Click have not mentioned legal action being taken against them, but have shown support for what Wonder and Oz are facing. And dipping my toe into the realm of speculation, there are a couple of reasons I could think for why Click and OT might not be facing legal threats so far. I think it's either that OT and Click may have similar resources to Blair to be able to actually defend themselves in court, unlike Oz and Wonder, or what I think is more likely, but again this is a gut feeling, OT and Click were never Blair's employees. If I had to guess, it's far more likely that Blair intends to argue that Oz and Wonder are in violation of some contract they signed as her employees, unlike OT or Click. Wonder even specified that Blair would abuse an NDA he signed to silence him, despite her not even abiding by the terms of that very agreement. Blair might be hoping that sufficiently scaring the more vulnerable people to speak out against her could make OT and Click silent in order to not make things worse for their friends. Though Wonder and Oz are also the only ones to reside in the US, which might make them more realistic targets for Blair than pursuing international lawsuits with a Canadian and Swedish resident. Who knows, if we're lucky, maybe Legal Eagle can explain and bring this full circle. But on the topic of this crowdfunding, Oz elaborates on the GoFundMe he had posted, saying that none of the money being donated to him will go to Blair, but instead to the other expenses that he's currently facing, with particular focus on his legal fees. Much like Wonder, this will include full transparency on how the money is being spent, which with Blair apparently trying to silence anyone she can, it's great to see some actual transparency in this mess, even if she was the first one to promise it. But we're left with a few key takeaways that I think are worth pointing out. For starters, Oz. Oz was named in everyone else's stories as being somewhat of an enforcer for Blair, but despite that, he's now on good terms with all of the members of Sadmilk. And while Oz's consistent willingness to own up to his actions already suggested something strange being behind this dynamic, wow, this video does that even more. This isn't even Oz's main video yet, but the dynamic he presents throughout his relationship to iilluminaughtii, where she routinely coerced him into behaviors he wasn't comfortable with, in my opinion, that goes a long way to explaining how Oz could have been easily manipulated to go along with her toxic actions for so long, especially since he's taken accountability for that to the satisfaction of those affected by this behavior.
I was highly skeptical, which I made note of, but I listened, and as we began to talk once again, we started to connect the dots and find so much context that had been left out between us. I was still very much on edge with my trust, but over the last few months, Oz has made countless efforts to prove not only to me, but to every other former Sadmilk member that he truly was sorry for the role he played in anything that took place. It shows a tremendous amount of strength, and Oz will always have my respect as a person for what he has done. I don't blame him for his role. He was in an abusive situation and had every reason to fear Blair.
Especially since Wonder expressed that he had been coerced in similar ways by Blair.
Audience members grew confused about this, so she took to Reddit to falsify a narrative which you can read on screen. I joined in as well on this. I explained how those who departed did not help us in numerous ways, and that it all fell onto us. I'd like to point out that I directly lied on this post. I believed Blair had my best interest at heart and was being thorough with me. I have since been proven that this was far from the case.
And there's one thing I want to elaborate on, which is why I believe these 4 accusers so far. Because no, I don't typically shy away from pointing out when accusations seem to be accompanied by sinister or misleading intentions. And as I've said on this channel before, I don't typically like personal conflicts being brought to the internet because even with the best of intentions, bias or the high of what you think is justice can be incredibly hard to keep in check. But there is a huge exception, which is when you have reasonable suspicion of abusive behavior continuing, and this is the only way to stop it. And this is exactly that. Blair was still using alt accounts to spread rumors about Click and OT enabling child likers. She chose to out Wonder's very personal struggles with mental health, despite that having nothing to do with any of this, and she's using financial power over Oz to assert control to this day. I would be much more sympathetic if this were a situation where Blair's low points were being used to paint a picture of her entire character, but that's just not the case here. Also, iilluminaughtie's response video was horrible. She failed to refute even a single accuser's story and instead went for unrelated character assassination. And in the realm of accountability, every instance of iilluminaughtii admitting any flaw in her behavior was immediately preceded or followed by her claiming someone else was actually at fault.
Furthermore, I want to take responsibility for my own involvement with a crowd I am happy to no longer associate with.
Again, I have a much easier time giving someone the benefit of the doubt when they're willing to say, look, I messed up at these points and that's on me, but on these particular instances, I don't think I'm being portrayed fairly, rather than, oh, I know all of these people with a documented history of conflict with each other are agreeing that I was personally responsible for toxic and abusive actions, but I won't even consider that they're right. The problem was actually that I was too kind. And I feel like a broken record here, but my main takeaway is still that Blair is screwed. Maybe legally there's a way for her to eke out a win, but I don't see any scenario where she's able to save her reputation. Hell, her views took an incredible hit from all of this, yet the comments and likes are still scathingly against her. And if she's still not providing any compelling evidence that we're being misled, and for the life of me I can't find any contradictions between the accusers, I would be shocked to see this turn around. Though I gotta say, I think one of the funniest PR nightmares in all this is that Blair has to refute claims of her running conspiracies against those she dislikes while weaponizing her mass influence, and her handle is literally Illuminaughtii. But okay, you get how this started. A creator known for virtue became a little too comfortable and let one act of pettiness slip, and this small chink in the armor was enough for her victims to rally around one another and finally fight back after years of suffering and silence. And as time went on, Blair only continued to ramp up her retaliation behind the scenes. See, in addition to her lawsuits against Wonder and Oz, Blair eventually started to take legal action against yet another of her former employees. But the similarities don't end there, because in the case of this employee, Felix, Blair sent the papers to an address they no longer reside at, as was the case with Wonder, and Blair is allegedly trying to use Felix's inaction, since he didn't get the papers, to force a default judgment for the case. For context, this was the employee who provided evidence that was crucial for Click proving Blair's behavior, such as the messages of Illuminaughtii paying people to dig up dirt on Click, as well as Blair's connection to her alt accounts. And as the Click points out, Blair specifically checks that Felix is financially desperate before offering him the money, which yeah, I can't help but read as incredibly exploitative, so this all just keeps getting worse. But believe it or not, this is where the tide started to turn. What do I mean? Well, Oz had previously mentioned that he was at a serious risk of losing his home.
I need to pump the brakes and change directions so I won't be homeless come Christmas. Because that's when Blair set my home to foreclose, right before Christmas.
A deadline that snuck up very quickly. So Oz took to Twitter and announced that they would be streaming in order to raise what's known as a cure amount, which is essentially a second chance to meet the terms of your contract after failing to before more serious consequences are enacted. In Oz's case, this would have meant his home being auctioned off to repay his debts. And while I can't show the documentation due to privacy concerns that I don't want to risk, I did go over the 4 pages that Oz shared. Basically, he's required to pay a total of over $15,000 between Illuminaughtii and Blair. And no, I didn't misspeak. It turns out that Oz's agreements were with both Blair as an individual, but also the company she runs. It makes sense that Oz is having such a hard time keeping up with this, since it seems he's being forced to pay for Blair's legal fees twice, and that alone makes up 10% of this total. And I want to point out that these documents are dated from August, which to me backs up what Oz shared, that he was turning to his audience as a last resort.
You should have asked sooner. #hugs, please say hi.
This was literally a last resort.
So as this deadline drew nearer, Oz's crowdfunding streamathon began. And despite him planning on a stream that was up to 24 hours long, it ended up being just under 7. So why? Well, it's because the stream went amazingly. Oz set a goal of $10,000, not even the full $15K, and expressed that his expectations for how much he would actually raise was relatively low.
This was supposed to be a 24-hour stream where I was hoping to maybe hit $3,000.
Yet he made his goal within 20 minutes.
I thought it would take, if I was lucky, like 5 streams to hit where we're at right now. I don't even know what to say.
And even went on to earn over triple that amount.
No matter how many times I try to express gratitude, I'll never be able to properly thank all of you for what you all have done for me today.
Cryptic Gabriel has...
And we hit $33,000 right as I was wrapping things up. Look at that.
And it's hard to overstate the significance of this moment in the context of this whole saga. At first glance, the situation seemed hopeless, like there was no means of restraining Blair's fury. So between this and his original crowdfunding push, Oz was starting to see some major wins that frankly should have been impossible. And those wins weren't just financially either. For example, OneTopic and Wonder both partook in the stream, while Click donated and showed his support in chat.
Click! 269 sec.
See, Oz had explained that Blair caused him to be isolated from his friends, including the other Sad Milk members.
All of my connections had to be approved by her. I wasn't allowed to be friends with people she didn't like, such as Click and OneTopic, or even Wonder, once that bridge was burned and reduced to cinders.
This even involved Oz joining in on her grudges against the others, though Wonder described his first-hand experience with being in this position and how Blair had made him feel like participating in this behavior was in his best interest.
I'd like to point out that I directly lied on this post. I believed Blair had my best interest at heart and was being thorough with me. I have since been proven that this was far from the case.
And to give you an idea of how much these connections eroded for Oz, take Wonder. Even as another victim of Blair, he described being very hesitant to speak to Oz when the latter reached out, and explained it took Oz time and effort to earn his forgiveness and trust.
I was highly skeptical, which I made note of. I was still very much on edge with my trust, but over the last few months, Oz has made countless efforts to prove not only to me, but to every other former Sad Milk member that he truly was sorry for the role he played in anything that took place. It shows a tremendous amount of strength, and Oz will always have my respect as a person for what he has done. I don't blame him for his role. He was in an abusive situation and had every reason to fear Blair. I feared her too for a very long time.
And during his stream, Oz expressed such intense gratitude for having the chance to reforge these friendships.
I have missed all the friends that I've lost throughout all of this, and being able to like actually sit down and play games with them again after all of these years is
It's not much, but I still wanted to help however
so good.
So after a year of living in constant fear, Oz was finally able to experience some levity that, honestly, it sounded like he really needed. I mean, watching the stream, I couldn't help but notice how panicked and just tired Oz sounded. For example, with the financial security this money was able to provide him in the short term, Oz talks about how this will allow him not to buy luxuries or spend money frivolously, but just go back to actually living instead of just surviving.
I'm gonna be able to buy furniture, I'm gonna be able to keep the house, I'm gonna be able to live here, I'm gonna be able to enjoy. I can't even describe or talk about walking into a room and thinking like, oh, it'd be cool if I could like put this art here or like hang up a disc plate or something, and then hit with the crushing realization of like, why bother? We're gonna have to take it down.
And he described just how far he planned on going in order to stay awake to raise this money, and yeah, he needed this win.
I was fully prepared to be streaming for 24 hours to be able to hit my goal. Like, I even have like my ADHD medication here to keep me pumping for when I start to fall asleep. Hell, this right here is an electric tweezer. I was literally going to like tweeze my legs with an electric tweezer to cause pain to give myself the adrenaline to keep myself awake for a 24-hour stream in hopes of maybe hitting like $5,000. I was ready to go through some very like torturous ways of keeping myself awake so that way I could hit a fraction of what you guys have been generous enough to help me with.
And I will say, I'm a cynic who tries to view these situations with caution, but honestly, Oz just came off as really sincere to me. Once he reached his goal, he made it abundantly clear on screen that he didn't need more donations. He also just went on to host a normal stream and seemed to even forget about the money.
Hey, Wonder. Hey, Wonder. Good night, sweet prince. Never mind.
Whereas it would have been very easy and even understandable for him to keep increasing the goal to provide future security. He even kept the stream going after the donations had died down despite being vocally tired.
I feel bad because I promised like a 24-hour stream. I don't think I'm gonna go for the full 24 hours, but I'm gonna definitely try pushing it for as long as I can. Because I don't mind continuing to stream.
Again, it's just my opinion, but seeing the difference between how Blair insists on staying in the shadows and escalating this, while Oz and Wonder show such transparency and earnestness, I just can't picture a scenario where Blair somehow turns this around. And Oz went on to end the stream with a message of hope and relief despite the fight ahead.
I love all of you for what you've managed to help me get through. This is a chapter on my life that I will actually be able to close. I'm gonna go get some sleep, some actual sleep. Sleep where I don't wake up with a panic attack, sleep where I don't have a nightmare. Thank you.
Because no, this isn't over. He still has to battle it out in court and finish his expose. And I think what really puts into perspective the effect that Blair's managed to have on him is what Oz resolved to do as soon as the stream was over.
Honestly, I'm gonna do some cleaning. Some midnight cleaning. My neighbors are gonna think I'm crazy, but I'm gonna do some cleaning.
Though unfortunately, this relief didn't last for long. See, while Blair's legal actions were initially meant to silence her detractors, they continued to escalate until becoming capable of sinking them, especially Oz. And this is where Blair allegedly started to fight dirty.
It is of my opinion that Blair timed these events so I could only fight one, the foreclosure or the lawsuit, not both. I do believe that if I did not speak out against her in April, she would not have put my home through foreclosure proceedings. With these actions, timed alongside the lawsuit, it does make me firmly believe, in my opinion, it's retaliatory in nature.
But thanks to a massively successful crowdfunding push, they've been able to defend themselves in court instead of having to be silent about the abuses they allegedly faced. Though Oz had shared on December 19th, 2023 that he managed to exit foreclosure proceedings with Blair. So while this didn't mark the end of Oz's fight, it did at least afford him some much needed breathing room heading into 2024. But believe it or not, everything I've talked about so far happened in 2023. And 2024 marked a dramatic shift for Illuminaughtii, where she started the year off swinging to keep her career going before disappearing without a trace. Though at this point, there might be a burning question in your mind. Why? Like really, why the hell was Illuminaughtii in such a vulnerable position? I mean, when it's all said and done, it's quite rare for a creator to lose hundreds of thousands of subscribers while seeing their views cut into a tenth of what they were. Yet that's exactly what happened to Illuminaughtii, almost overnight. And it comes down to three simple components. One, she placed herself on a very high pedestal. So much of her work was about fighting injustice that she cemented herself as almost a beacon of morality. And the YouTube audience will often be happy to help you onto a pedestal, but they are equally happy to turn against you if that's found to be a facade. Second, there was the severity of the accusations. YouTuber drama is usually pretty tame. I mean, we normally hear about a bit of ego, some greed, edgy humor that backfires, or at worst, a romantic relationship where the person is accused of abuse. We've never really seen a creator dedicate their life to hurting people like they were the Joker. And the third is the quantity. Every time it looked like we've heard everything, new accusations would break. The videos from the four main accusers came out over the course of months, and each was both more disturbing and more well proven than the last. But at the very least, she had her content, right? I mean, she was making videos that people enjoyed, so as long as her reputation as a creator remained intact, maybe she could convince enough people that her reputation as a person shouldn't matter, right? Enter Hbomberguy. See, to call Hbomberguy a video essay YouTuber would actually be putting it pretty mildly. It would instead be more accurate to say that the man truly lives up to his name, disappearing from YouTube for up to a year at a time before dropping a video essay that gets up to tens of millions of views while shaking up YouTube at its core before going back into silence. And in December of 2023, he decided to tackle the rising prevalence of plagiarism on YouTube.
You can spend ages on a unique video with an original idea, and a way more popular guy can rip it off, along with its thumbnail, get a bajillion views and rake in the cash. On YouTube, if you have an original idea, if it's good, it won't be yours for long.
With particular focus on Illuminaughtii.
Some poor Illuminaughtii fans out there think I'm mad at her for quoting some words slightly wrong, because they assume, in good faith, that the YouTuber they like wouldn't tell them an obvious lie. Sadly, Illuminaughtii isn't a unique story. She's just the most prominent tip of the iceberg of content mill video essay garbage.
And not only was Blair's content criticized in an essay with over 30 million views, but Hbomberguy made a second video entirely focused on how she plagiarizes documentaries.
The smart aleck in high school who had to write a 2,000-word essay and submitted one with 1,800 words of quotes decided to start a YouTube channel, and it's not pretty.
And that video received another 4 million views. So whatever credibility Blair was trying to cling to, that was shattered. Especially when you remember how much she clutched her pearls and cried plagiarism at Legal Eagle for a much lesser extent of imitation. This all left her with no way to convince her audience to give her another chance, hence the over 500,000 subscribers and counting that have left. So going into 2024, how is Blair going to pull off the greatest comeback in YouTuber history? Well, she wasn't. I mean, she was already well on the back foot before this dropped thanks to the Sad Milk creators, and the claims that Hbomberguy was making, there really wasn't any possible excuse. Like, the examples that he provided of plagiarism on the Illuminaughtii channel were pretty damning.
She downloads the footage and then paraphrases the voiceover, and if you're lucky, she'll briefly acknowledge she's just telling you what happened in a documentary you could have watched for yourself.
He's the grandfather of the MMR scare. The professor is semi-retired, but still charges up to $750 an hour to treat autistic children.
So this grandfather of the anti-vax movement, as he described, charges $150 an hour to treat autistic children, which, you know, is fucking ridiculous.
You're quoting another documentary. How are you getting these numbers wrong?
So she decided to carry on as if nothing happened in the hopes that everyone would just move on and let her rebuild. But they didn't. Her views plummeted to roughly 1/10 of what they were, and whatever engagement she would receive was universally negative. Like, for context, I would normally consider a long-form channel to be struggling if they're not able to consistently reach 10% of their subscriber number in views. But Blair was now struggling to reach 2%, and the quality of the uploads themselves started to take a hit. See, shortly after this plagiarism scandal dropped, one of Blair's videos had a serious editing oversight where her voice was cut out for several minutes. Now, I once made a similar mistake, so, you know, it happens. Even though I had like 1,000 subscribers and I've always run the channel by myself, but I'm sure there's a really good reason for why a channel with the whole team running it could make this mistake that doesn't rely on them just being a content farm running on autopilot. But either way, she wasn't made aware of this mistake for quite a while since the comments to all of her videos were turned off. Yeah, when the focus on you is now shifting to how you're careless and lazy with your content and can't take feedback, that's not the best set of circumstances. So after trying, and clearly failing, to power through the hate, Blair suddenly just vanished on February 15th, 2024, where she uploaded to YouTube in what has since been her last appearance online as iilluminaughtii. And for context, this was her first upload in almost a year to cross 100,000 views, but with an estimated 5% like ratio. Like, it only gained that many views because of months of people randomly coming to the channel to leave a dislike on her last upload. So while that's the last we've seen of Blair publicly, that's not to say that Blair has definitely left the internet, because yeah, she could always start a new anonymous channel and apply her knowledge of YouTube to build it until it makes an income.
And with the recent innovations in voice AI, many have speculated that that's her plan to come back without anyone knowing it's her.
So while it's going to be a hassle, she could in theory be fine in the long run. Not to mention that all evidence points to her being pretty damn rich as is.
Blair would oftentimes tell me that she herself had enough money to retire at any given moment, while she was a very successful businesswoman, and from the surface that did seem true. Blair even had a few BMWs of her own.
Plaintiff's revenue from videos, $74,646 in the period of November 23rd, 2022, December 23rd, 2022.
But while the Illuminaughtii brand is at a standstill, that's not to say that 2024 hasn't been an incredibly eventful year, because Blair's most recent developments have all been happening behind the scenes. If you remember, Blair's MO at this point is trying to handle things with lawyers. Basically, if she's going down, she's bringing down as many people as she can, even if that means foreclosing a home or two in the process. Which brings us to Oz Media's ongoing fight with Illuminaughtii. See, as he decided to fight back in court, Oz Media also pledged to expose more of Blair's misdeeds to the public in what has basically been promised to be a feature-length documentary.
The reason why this video has taken so much time as it has is not only am I a one-man team producing this, but I'm also continually uncovering more segments to the story and hearing more and more voices that come forward to speak their side of things. Interviews, questionnaires, screenshots, the works. All from a number of individuals.
But while continuing to develop that, he released what he considers to be its prologue on June 1st, 2024. And for the most part, he uses this video to shine a light on the legal trickery being deployed by Blair, as well as provide Blair with an opportunity to settle this out of court. Now, it's worth noting the level of confidence that Oz maintains throughout this video.
I am fully willing to submit this video and its subsequent parts to the courts as further evidence, as I am willing to stand by these words, as I'm treating this as though I'm speaking under oath. I am also not stating this to add an air of authority to my words, as Blair's legal team has previously proposed. My lawyer is aware I'm doing this.
Because, yeah, he comes out swinging with how he characterizes Blair's retaliation through this process.
Blair's lawsuit, in my opinion, relies on the misconstruing of facts and utilizes a personally curated timeline, which she has constructed in order to gain the bare minimum standards of having this case proceed. Because I'm exhausted with the, in my opinion, legal shenanigans Blair is currently pulling, this video exists. Blair is trying to paint her entire downfall on YouTube as being nothing more than my actions towards her as a jealous ex. I'm not jealous towards your current partner, Blair. Only sympathetic.
And while this initially started with Blair claiming to remove anti-swatting measures taken for Oz's safety, most of her trickery can be found on the legal side of things. Now, of course, this is all from Oz's perspective, but I'm not going to be saying allegedly and according to Oz every 2 seconds, even though most sellout YouTubers love to pad their videos for more mid-roll ads. Anyway, a key part of Blair's lawsuits are that they largely focus on the claim of slander, basically saying that Oz is part of a coordinated effort to destroy Blair with false claims unprompted. But in trying to make that argument, Blair's messaging seems to be unreliable at best.
There is currently no reference to her ever uploading this video or any of the public comments she's made, making it appear as though she never played in the mud, and her criticisms came from nowhere. My point here is that Blair's story has already had numerous revisions, and she sees her video as an attempt at de-escalation. If you recall, among the many other accusations she levies, Blair accused YouTuber The Click of harboring files in his Discord server. In what world this is a de-escalation? I cannot say.
Now, Oz's defense focuses on the claim that slander had never taken place, and much of this argument hinges on Blair's infamous attempt at responding to her detractors, Illuminaughtii Exposed. Because prior to this video's release, the majorities of the accusations aimed at Blair were either about her as a collaborator or vaguely about her as a person. And taking Oz at his word, he and the other creators only spoke up because Blair managed to get herself into the aforementioned controversy with Legal Eagle that caused these creators to also get negative attention due to their past association with her. So these initial statements, according to Oz, were needed for them to protect their brands and distance themselves. But Blair's response was such a gross escalation that it forced these four to start making the claims that are now being argued as slanderous. Like, Blair was the one who accused the Click of protecting child likers, which is an accusation you have to respond to. Same with Wonder being an unreliable freeloader. Yeah, if you're a YouTuber, image is everything. Just ask Blair. So the four creators had to respond to these serious allegations, either because they threatened to ruin their reputations, as was the case with Click and Wonder, or because they witnessed events that were being mischaracterized, like with OneTopic and Oz.
Without ambiguity, I wanted to address the parts that I was present for that I feel were misrepresented and lied about, just to clear the air on that side, since I feel at least a little bit like some words were put in my mouth.
You were kind of just literally being paid to like stand around. I might be wrong on this, but you actively did try to like assist her with her the candle shop that she was just starting up, and I mean, she didn't like that, but you were actively trying to seek out and find work, so it's not like you were just like freeloading off of it. From my memory, you were trying to actually earn your keep.
And this is just the start of Blair desperately trying to recontextualize everyone's actions in order to remove any personal responsibility.
Felix provides documentation of Blair offering him $200 to sift through prior Sad Milk recordings to find evidence of Click using the R word. These screenshots in question are what Blair is suing for defamation, as well as breach of contract. What is not included within this lawsuit, however, is the screenshot evidence provided by Felix of Blair owning the alt account that was created to harass Click, as well as his cohorts in 2020. Take this information as you will. Felix came to the aid of someone defending themselves. What Blair has done in this lawsuit is completely remove any and all instances or references of her public statements to make it appear as though any attack against her is slanderous.
And this went even further, with Blair trying to pin all of the damages she has suffered on whoever is most convenient, even when the growing misfortune to her business stems from many factors.
More people are aware of Blair because of Hbomberguy than they are for any of the other drama-related reasons surrounding her. Defendant Felix's statement caused special damages, as evident by the fact that plaintiff's revenue from videos dropped by more than 95% after defendant's tweet/X was published. Blair is listing a drop of revenue from a specific date period and ignoring the fact that her revenue had begun to decline far before then. The official date, April 20th, 2023, is when we can see the first damage being done to her subscriber count. This is also the day she levied accusations against Legal Eagle. Again, the damages Blair is suffering is of her own doing. The only reason any of us are in this position is because of the actions Blair initially took on April 20th, 2023.
And that's only the start. See, Blair became desperate to silence as many of her critics as possible, and allegedly went to great lengths in trying to make that wish legally binding, whether in reference to her past behavior.
I do want to briefly talk about a few details in the CPO ordered against me, which, again, was denied, where Blair accuses me of beating her dog, Casper. I also, in my personal opinion, believe that this is further evidence of Blair twisting and manipulating facts, or in some cases, just outright lying. The terms of both said CPOs are this. Petitioner requests that this court order to delete all posts X has made to social media since April 23, 2023, pertaining to Sad Milk, Petitioner, or her social media platforms. The restraining orders in question were to, once more, prevent publication of any information on Blair. In this restraining order, Blair directly cites the video I was originally producing as a documentary on her actions as grounds to allow this pseudo-gag order to proceed. Scared of something?
Or to gain free reign to abuse the legal system unopposed.
This, in my opinion, was an attempt at a gag order to prevent all future posting on Blair. Specifically, in my opinion, to lay the groundwork for her to begin her lawsuit unopposed with no worry of public retaliation, as well as to prevent any and all future responses from being posted. It is my opinion that Blair had the motives to silence the critics so she could begin her attempt at rewriting the public narrative.
And in general, Blair sought to throw out as many hurdles as possible against her detractors so they would drown, many of which have been dismissed.
I will add that as of this video's production, Wonder has not been served by the courts and is currently on the table for dismissal. 2 civil protection orders against myself as well as Wonder were filed by Blair. These were denied by the court. August 29th, 2023, Blair would submit a new set of temporary restraining orders, which were denied.
And while already silencing critics is a bad look, that's not where Blair's dirty tricks end. See, another defendant of Blair's lawsuits is a former employee named Felix, because Felix had done work for Blair across 2 companies. First, he worked for the company that managed the Sad Milk channel, and later he received a role at Pyramid Entertainment, which handles the Illuminaughtii channel itself. Now, this might seem surprising because Felix is not involved in this as a YouTuber or public figure in quite the same way as Wonder or Oz. But that's because behind the scenes, Felix was instrumental in providing evidence that showed Blair's obsession with ruining her former friends.
Here is Illuminaughtii having a conversation with the same admin, sharing the same kind of, dirt-digging old videos that we've seen previously in this video. And she says, 16 seconds, the alt account is gonna love this.
Now those messages were damning for Blair. I mean, with Oz and Wonder, you could argue that it's just a personal conflict where we can't take anyone at their word, but this showed a frankly disgusting way that Blair was spending a huge amount of her free time for literally no tangible reason.
This draft matches with one of the posts made by an alt account called Doobie Schmertz on Reddit. Here is the same account, Doobie Schmertz, on Twitter. This was an account I remember distinctly from 2020, 2021 that was relentlessly harassing myself, my friends, my colleagues, my streaming colleagues, past colleagues, ex-Sad Milk members, community members, you name it. You name it. And it keeps going. Here it is on Twitter, tagging me, tagging herself. It's tagging Deaf Noodles. Here it's tagging Midnight Palma, Damien. It's tagging a bunch of people from the community and Salty. It's tagging Amanda the Jedi. We had her on the guest on the podcast, and you come after Amanda the Jedi? It goes on. It keeps going. This isn't some small YouTuber beef. This isn't people being angry at each other because, ooh, someone did a bit more work in a project or not.
It was the first real piece of evidence that Blair's behavior went beyond typical YouTuber feuds and entered the territory of being, frankly, scary. So Blair is desperately trying to punish Felix in ways that, let's just say, should be illegal if they aren't.
Felix was never directly handed papers. Instead, the papers were delivered by mail to an address he lives 2 hours away from. The papers were never formally handed to Felix. Felix's sister found an envelope in the mail with regular US postage labeled to Felix on or around October 6th. This directly opposes the processor's claim of directly handing it to Felix. The argument of us theorizing that Blair was trying to get a default judgment against Felix comes from the fact that after the service attempt, nearly every day afterwards, Felix would check in with the Colorado courts for an official proof of service to be filed, so he could begin his legal battle. However, proof of service was not filed until after the time required for Felix to respond.
Like, I'm not a legal expert by any stretch, but it's hard to imagine that the extent of deception being documented isn't going to be ruinous for Blair once the judge puts it together.
Proof of service was not filed with the courts until November 17th, more than 2 weeks after, meaning that Felix would have defaulted. Even my lawyer was caught off guard by these actions.
But either way, Blair's alleged trend of mischaracterizing events continued into her suit against Felix. See, sharing private messages isn't generally illegal, right? When that cute boy texts you, you're not breaking the law by sending it to the council of friends to help you formulate the perfect response to let him know that you're fun and flirty, but he's still gotta work for it, right? So what makes this illegal? Well, according to Blair, there were confidentiality agreements that Felix signed while working for her that would prohibit him from being able to share company communication, which these messages would fall under. But Oz scathingly rebukes this argument, saying that this conversation can't possibly be considered one that Felix was having as an employee of Pyramid Entertainment.
The screenshot in question happened November 10th, 2020, nearly 7 months before Felix's employment under Pyramid Entertainment. The NDA should not cover private messages unrelated to Pyramid LLC. It appears to me that Blair is attempting to claim that every conversation she has ever had with an employee throughout all of time, even matters unrelated to Pyramid Entertainment, are under NDA. It is also important to point out that these actions in question were not, to my knowledge, normal company practice to specifically target employees who were low on money to dig up dirt on prior collaborators of Blair's.
In fact, not only do these conversations not seem to fall under the scope of Pyramid Entertainment, but Oz's team believes that they can't even be argued as anything more than Blair soliciting personal favors.
I would also like to add that if this was official company business, there should be a documented 1099 form or other specific documentation to show the payments to Felix are properly documented for specifically Pyramid Entertainment. After talking with Felix and being shown his TurboTax filing from 2020, I can confidently state neither this 1099 nor any form of company documentation exists to specify this payment as being directly in service of Pyramid Entertainment. In my eyes, I see this as Blair retroactively changing the events of 2020 to fit her narrative within the lawsuit. The simple truth is, this conversation was held November of 2020, and he was hired May of 2021. Blair is trying to claim that these were company communications and has framed it as such to make the lawsuit stick.
And there are even instances of Blair directly lying and trying to argue that people are being deceptive about her.
One of the reasons Blair is suing Felix is for defamation because of a DM where he claimed that Blair has used the R word in private. Well, here she is using it in public as an insult. The main focus here is the hypocrisy at play because it's plain as day. I actually think that Blair's lawyer put it best. Because implies that Blair is both a hypocrite and a bigot.
Now again, it's really important to remember that Oz's lawyer was aware that he was making this video and, if I had to guess, likely reviewed it before it went live. So when you consider how strong some of Oz's claims are, it only increases the chance, in my opinion, that Blair is hoping to run out the clock with these suits without them going to court because they're frankly ridiculous. In fact, another lawyer, YouTuber Madcaster, has reaffirmed the strength of both Oz's and Felix's cases. In fact, he expresses that the litigation seems to have only gone this far due to a lack of understanding from the judge in various elements of running a business on YouTube.
Apparently the judge, in my opinion, is not doing his due diligence in understanding what's going on with these people and what they do and how they interact, you know? Educate yourself on what these people do.
Now, Oz believes that Blair specifically targeted Felix to prevent him from being interviewed by Oz. Though, for what it's worth, Oz is using the crowdfunding he has received to help pay the legal expenses of other defendants, including Felix. Also, as far as legal action against Wonder goes, while he was served a cease and desist last year, he was never actually served a lawsuit, meaning his case has been on track to be dismissed.
I will add that as of this video's production, Wonder has not been served by the courts and is currently on the table for dismissal. If he does get served, the GoFundMe will be at his disposal for legal fees as well.
But I mentioned that Oz came with an offer for Blair, a way to end this. What did I mean?
My settlement offer is for you to drop the lawsuit, for all parties involved, even Wonder, with prejudice. I won't file counterclaims and would no longer be required to upload the second part to this video. Plaintiff and myself will agree on a third party who we both independently trust to host a fair conversation. Their responsibility will be to ensure that each person is not spoken over and is given a chance to clear their mind. Plaintiffs may also take this time to take accountability for their actions instead if they wish. Legal fees of either party will not be sought out, and this will be taken for the loss that it is. I can provide no personal guarantee in either circumstance that you, Blair, would be able to repair your public image or reputation. That is up to you. However, I am giving you the opportunity that your lawsuit will most certainly not.
Yes, Oz put out an olive branch, a way to settle this in the court of public opinion rather than a court of law. Though Oz clarifies that this is not due to a lack of belief in his ability to win. More so, a lack of desire.
We've had to deal with the heartbreak of a miscarriage throughout all of this, and I just want the opportunity to heal with my partner in peace, which is why I'm even considering giving Blair this settlement. If Blair doesn't accept the following offer, let alone negotiate, so be it. I have no problem with continuing forward. I have no problem with continuing to pursue this until the end, as I do not fear the outcome of the case, especially after the judge's recent orders.
And while Oz initially provided a strict June deadline for Blair to accept his offer, negotiations have gone on for months, with them again meeting for mediation on December 3rd. Now, if you notice, most of what I mentioned from this update concerned Felix, and this is because Oz was waiting for his counterclaims to be accepted by the judge before going public with them, and he provided an update on October 27th, saying that now these claims have been accepted, he's comfortable going public and plans on doing so if these negotiations fall through.
There'll probably be no major updates until several days after mediation, and if mediation does fail, I will proceed with part 2 as planned, as the judge has accepted my counterclaims. My hope would be this lawsuit can come to a close. By the time that mediation does occur, this lawsuit will have cost over $80,000, and we haven't even entered discovery yet, so this very well could cost several more years of my life and hundreds of thousands of dollars down the line.
Though I had mentioned Oz's counterclaims because, yeah, in an effort to increase the pressure on Blair, Oz actually filed his own lawsuit against her. Now, this was broken down by Vangelina Scav and Madcaster, two creators whose coverage of the legal side of things Oz has thus far praised. In essence, Oz is seeking to quiet title his home, basically to clear up any confusion about who actually owns the home, since Blair tried to claim she had the right to take it through foreclosure. And much of Oz's claims center around the argument that he was coerced into signing ownership of debt without representation.
This document then goes on to make some very damning allegations against iilluminaughtii. For example, saying that Oz believes that Blair coerced him into signing the deed of trust against his home, and that he was also pressured by Blair into signing various documents reporting to evidence of debts by him to her.
Which, based on his initial characterization of these events, would sound correct. Or at least in the opinion of someone with a degree in film that almost went to law school but decided to do YouTube instead. Yeah, I started losing myself the more that sentence went on, so I'll remind you of Oz's description.
When I was 23 and Blair was nearly 31, Blair, with her lawyer, would create an honestly quite confusing legal document for me to sign where I would agree to pay back her debt. Blair, being the person who signed my checks, knew that I couldn't afford legal representation. She essentially explained to me that because she used company funds to assist me, that she had committed embezzlement. And by converting the amount that I owed her into a loan with her company, this would save her skin legally. When I was 11, my mother was incarcerated for this exact crime, a remnant of the 2008 financial crisis. Blair was aware of this past of mine. Whether this was used against me, I can't say for certain, but the idea of another person I loved being locked away, but this time for my actions? Words cannot describe the guilt that I had.
Oz's suit also points out the legal trickery that Blair has been committing.
A big thing in her request for a restraining order was that Oz Media was not going to be allowed to discuss her publicly at all on YouTube, on anything. So what it seemed like was that she was trying to get a gag order against him. And this is what's being claimed in this document as well, that this was an attempt to silence Oz and others from talking about her on the internet. But of course, this didn't go through.
As well as financial mismanagement and kind of what sounds like fraud.
It then goes on to say that Oz believes that a lot of the debt that was written into this document was from Blair's own personal expenses. So not money that he had spent at all, or money that they had spent together during their short romantic relationship, which were expenses that he had believed that they were supposed to share. It then says that Blair used company funds for things that weren't company expenses, but added these to the ledger of debt to claim that it was a loan she had given to Oz, and that this was now a legitimate business expense, when in fact it may not have been that at all. So extremely damning accusations to make. However, this $40,000, which was meant to be payment to him for work that he had done, was included in the ledger of debt. So she had added this as money that he owed her, even though it was supposed to be payment. And Oz believes that Blair would later inflate the $40,000 payment to $49,999 with no reason for doing this. She just did it.
And to say that this lawsuit was scathing against Blair would be putting it lightly. It uses some very strong language that seems to suggest the confidence that Oz and his team have.
The detriment of his own financial well-being, all as a consequence of Blair's urging, manipulation, coercion, deceit, and overbearing narcissism, which only foreshadowed her toxic personal and professional identity.
And Oz specifically asked for the trial to be decided by a jury, which does make sense to me. See, Oz had speculated in his update that the judge was giving Blair leniency because he wasn't personally familiar with the YouTube space and so didn't understand some of the subject matter.
The judge is not connected to or well educated on the YouTube space, nor the drama which has transpired. He is doing his job and acting according to the documents provided in front of him.
So having a group of day-to-day people increases the likelihood that the ones deciding this case will be more familiar with certain niche aspects. Now at first, the deadline for mediation, December 3rd, came and went without any word from Oz, and as the weeks went on, more uncertainty began to grow about if this saga was finally over or just getting started. And then, on the first day of the new year, Oz broke his silence.
Blair and I have agreed to settle this matter confidentially through mediation. The lawsuit has been dismissed against all parties without any admission of fault by any party. As a part of the non-disclosure agreement, it should be known that Blair will not be sharing her side of the story behind this dispute, nor will I. No one should contact either of us further about this case or ask us to comment on it, or each other. As I have stated previously, anyone following me should never make threatening remarks to anyone involved in this case in a public or private forum.
Yes, by all accounts, the Illuminati saga is over. Now, as you probably noticed, Oz was being incredibly vague about the nature of the agreement they came to, but at the very least, it's over. Though Oz's statement does mean that the multi-part expose he intended on making will never see the light of day. Now, it's worth noting that, as far as I could find, we don't have an official confirmation on what this means for Wonder and Felix, but seeing as how Wonder's case was already close to dismissal, neither has commented further on this on their GoFundMe campaigns or Twitter, and Oz previously stating that his terms for dropping the case involved Blair leaving them alone.
My settlement offer is for you to drop the lawsuit, for all parties involved, even Wonder, with prejudice.
Then that's hopefully a good sign that, yes, the Illuminati saga is finally over. Well, kind of. See, with any event, there's fallout. So while we're at the present, let's talk about the future. Yeah, there's a word being thrown around a lot here, which is comeback. Is Blair going to make a comeback? What's her plan for the comeback? Can she even make a comeback? Because hey, YouTube money is great, especially when your job is just paraphrasing documentaries. But you already know that the answer is no. You don't need me to tell you that. But what I do think is interesting about Illuminati isn't how she's left without an audience, but the ways in which she made it impossible for anyone in that audience to ever return. Because the mistakes that were made over the last 2 years were not only so amateurish that it shocks me that someone on her level could make them, but they were so impossibly specific that it's no wonder it took 18 years of YouTube to see a PR screw up this massive. What do I mean? Well, there's the fact that her first mistake was able to act as proof for the main accusation she faced. Remember, she went after Legal Eagle for using similar documentary visuals to the Illuminati channel, despite said effects being generic ones that she didn't even create. So you might say that trying to ruin someone for a perceived slight, when the slight in question holds no water, is a pretty petty and vindictive thing to do, right? You know what else someone who's petty and vindictive might do? Spread rumors of someone being attracted to minors because they respectfully left a project, or trying to use those rumors to drive a wedge between him and a close friend and have said friend labeled an enabler, or crossing state lines to illegally possess a car that you coerce someone into letting you lease them, or trying to repossess a house from your ex-partner. Like, it's crazy to me that before any proof was presented, the first stone that Blair threw over something so trivial and stupid was enough to suggest that, regardless of if she did those things, she was certainly capable of them. Not to mention that at least twice she clutches her pearls about accusations that she herself is later found guilty of.
Blair accused one of Devon's editors of taking her video's style. They were trying to replicate her videos. One segment was about the YouTuber iilluminaughtii, whose videos heavily plagiarized documentaries. She downloads the footage and then paraphrases the voiceover, and if you're lucky, she'll briefly acknowledge she's just telling you what happened in a documentary you could have watched for yourself.
In 2020, Click was still using horrifying language and slurs that have long been deemed unacceptable.
Blair can be seen in this tweet using the exact word in question that she condemns and damns others for using, only 3 years prior to her stating, "That word was never in my vocabulary." According to Blair,
Even 10 years is inexcusable.
But then she decides to escalate the situation by bringing in intimate details of her former employee's mental health, when there has been a huge surge in sympathy and seriousness surrounding conversations around mental health over the past decade. And it's a creator who was less than a tenth her size when people hate to see creators punching down, and then you use your wealth to try and force them into silence with litigation, when the audience on YouTube hates being reminded that some YouTubers are rich almost as much as they hate YouTubers turning to litigation, even if it's justified. To loosely quote Barry Allen, if there was an Olympics for bad choices, Blair didn't just medal, she Michael Phelps'd. Do you know how bad you have to mess up to get the internet to universally side with 4 white dudes, one of whom is a literal blue-haired liberal? If there was ever going to be a group for the internet to turn against, you would think it's this one, but no. The extent of Blair's possible literal crimes are both so great and numerous that the Illuminati brand is broken beyond repair. And every time Blair has had the chance to change course, she just kept making things worse. Like, not for nothing, but the fact that Oz and Blair settled their lawsuit on seemingly equal terms seems miraculous when you remember that at the beginning, her strategy was to sink him with litigation and literally take the roof over his head. And while I say equal terms because they've both signed an NDA to not speak about the other, that means nothing in the court of public opinion. As one commenter wisely put it, the problem with no admission of wrongdoing is it leaves the public to make up their own minds. With the current information publicly available, this is a crushing defeat for Blair. Not being able to share her side of things means that we're left with the status quo. She may not be admitting any wrongdoing, but we all know she did wrong. And by all appearances, it seems like Blair's victims are doing pretty darn well now, all things considered. The Click and OneTopic have long since resumed making content and are both still killing it. And Wonder actually decided to start over from scratch, launching a new channel where instead of the Reddit commentary he was known for, he would tackle video essays on some of the internet's bad actors. And not only is he also killing it, but his videos are performing leagues better than ever before. Like, there are 7 years of videos from Wonder on YouTube, yet all 4 of his most viewed videos ever were published in the last year. It is hard to emphasize how impressive that is for a channel, especially one that had to start over. And Oz has resumed making his usual content both on his main channel as well as his second, and is also doing quite well. Also, Legal Eagle sued the government at one point.
I, along with my co-counsel, believe that the American people have a right to know what the Department of Justice and the FBI discovered when they investigated Donald Trump.
God, Blair picked the worst person to antagonize. So one last time, say it with me, Blair is screwed. That probably seemed really random if you've never watched my coverage on this before, but I've already had to make 7 pyramid-based outro jokes, which means I've had to dedicate more effort to them than Blair did to her videos, so